The doors creaked open like the jaws of something ancient and hungry, and for a second, the city council room forgot how to breathe. He stepped inside, slow, deliberate, dragging behind him the weight of years too thick for any man to carry. His coat, long and weathered like dried bark, swept across the polished floor, stirring up a silence heavier than judgment. He did not look around. He didn't need to. They were already looking at him. His skin, deep and lined like scorched earth, marked him before he spoke, before he moved. A black man, old enough to be someone's grandfather, too old to matter here, or so they thought. "Can I speak?" he asked, voice gravel-smoothed and low, like the rumble before a storm. Chuckles broke out, not laughter, sharp, brittle scoffs, like glass cracking. "You lost, sir," said one councilman, not hiding the venom. "This ain't open mic night." The mayor didn't bother speaking, just nodded toward the guards with a dismissive flick, the same motion used to shoo away flies. The two men in uniform moved with that bored cruelty that only power breeds, grabbing him by the arms like they'd done it before, maybe too many times. But as they reached for him, he didn't flinch. He didn't yell. He just turned his head, slow, sharp, eyes boring into the mayor like rusted nails. "You should know my name," he whispered, and for the briefest flicker, something old stirred behind the mayor's eyes, a twitch, a flicker of fear, but it was gone as quick as it came. "Get him out," he snapped. The old man was dragged across the hall like garbage, coat twisting like a banner behind him, and every step he took out the door left behind something no one wanted to admit they saw. Shame, maybe, or history, or a warning. No one noticed he dropped a small card on the floor. No one read the name written on it in careful ink. Not yet. But they would. Oh, they would. The town of Graybridge had long since learned how to smile while it strangled you. A place where the sidewalks were clean, the lawns trimmed, and the rot ran under the skin. The city council chamber was its altar, dressed in polished oak and American flags, where decisions were made for the people, but never by all of them. After the old man was dragged out like a stray dog, laughter rippled through the room, low and satisfied, like wolves licking their teeth. "What was that?" one councilwoman asked, leaning back in her leather chair. "He looked like he walked out of a museum. Civil rights era, maybe." Another chuckled. "More like a plantation ghost looking for his shack." No one corrected him. They laughed instead. The mayor, Robert E. Callahan III, a name passed down like a weapon, adjusted his tie, calm as a priest. "This chamber has rules," he said, loud enough for the onlookers to hear. "We can't have just anyone barging in off the street, thinking they have a voice here. Respect must be earned." And just like that, the matter was closed. No one asked his name. No one cared what he came to say. To them, he was a disturbance, not a citizen. A wrinkle in their polished world that needed to be ironed out. In the back of the room, a young black woman, one of the few, lowered her eyes and stayed silent. She'd seen this before, not here, but in the eyes of her grandmother, in the photographs no one wanted to frame. Outside, the old man was thrown onto the cold sidewalk, the guards brushing off their sleeves like they'd touched something dirty. "Stay out of here, old-timer," one said with a smirk. "Ain't your kind's place." He sat there a moment, not speaking, not moving, until the guard turned and walked away. Then slowly, the old man picked up his hat, dusted it off, and stood. He looked at the city hall building like it was a battlefield, long forgotten, and whispered again, almost lovingly, almost like a promise, "You should know my name." The footage hit the local news before the sun even set. A grainy cell phone clip, no more than 20 seconds, but enough to light a fuse. The old man being yanked out of the council chamber, his head snapping back as guards twisted his arms, the scrape of his shoes against marble floors as they dragged him like something left out in the rain. Some cheered it online, "Get that relic out of here!" while others whispered uneasily, sensing something wrong they couldn't quite name. But inside City Hall, there was no shame, only triumph. One of the guards, a young man with a sharp jaw and a sharper tongue, showed the video to his buddies in the locker room like it was a highlight reel. "Look at that face," he laughed. "Thought he was about to deliver a speech on the Underground Railroad." They howled. One mimicked the old man's slow walk, dragging his feet, shoulders hunched. I should have asked if he needed a cane or a time machine. Next time, said another. Don't be so gentle. Should have tossed him like we do with the bums downtown. Meanwhile, the old man sat alone on a concrete bench across the street, fingers clasped together like he was praying or remembering. His coat was torn at the sleeve, a smear of dried blood darkening the edge. People passed without looking. One white mother clutched her purse and crossed to the other side, glancing back like he might lunge at her. A man in a pickup slowed just long enough to shout, "City's cleaning up, huh, old man?" and roared off, the American flag in his truck bed whipping in the wind. But the old man didn't blink. He simply took a folded piece of paper from his coat, a letter yellowed with time, and stared at the name signed at the bottom, the same name now printed on the mayor's office door. That name had once signed an order to seize land. That name had ordered dogs. That name had promised that men like him would never sit at the table. His lip curled not in anger, but in memory. "We've met before," he said under his breath. To no one. "Your blood remembers mine." And somewhere in the heart of that shining painted building, the foundation creaked, just a little. Let's take a short pause. If you're still here, let us know in the comments. Where are you listening from? Have you ever witnessed or experienced something like this in your own life? Something that left a mark? Your voice matters. And if you want to hear how this story unfolds, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. Now, we continue. The town paper didn't run the story. They buried it under school board announcements and bake sale winners, pretending the old man had never entered that chamber, never been dragged like a bag of broken bones across public flooring funded by people like him. But one person couldn't let it go. Her name was Mia Carter, 26, sharp-eyed, and 2 years into a journalism job that paid in overdue coffee and stories that never made the front page. She hadn't said a word during the council meeting. She just sat in the back, watching, writing, watching again. But something about the old man's voice wouldn't let her sleep. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. Like his words were seeds, and the ground didn't even know it had already cracked. So the next morning, while the town laughed and scrolled past the video like another meme, Mia started digging. She ran his face through every archive she had access to. Facial recognition, criminal records, military files. At first nothing, then something strange. A photograph, 1932, black and white, low resolution, of a black man standing outside the original Graybridge courthouse. Same coat, same eyes, same scar over the left brow. The caption named him as Elijah Booker, age 27, arrested for disruption of public order. She checked again. It wasn't just similar, it was identical. The date on that arrest was almost a century ago. Mia's throat dried. She pulled the microfilm of old council notes. In 1932, a man named Elijah Booker had appeared before the council to contest the forced sale of his land, a prime stretch of riverfront stolen through a reassessment order. He was laughed out of the building. Hours later, he was attacked by unknown men and disappeared. Declared dead. No investigation. She whispered the name to herself over and over. Elijah Booker. It sounded like something pulled from under the floorboards. That night, she found a box of files in the basement of City Hall, marked private. Dusty, unopened, locked. The janitor let her in without asking why. "Just don't stay too long," he muttered. "That room, don't like people." She smiled politely, but inside she was already trembling. Because on the first folder inside, dated October 4th, 1932, there was a single phrase written in red ink across the top. Never allowed back in. And underneath it, one name. Elijah Booker. Mia stood in front of the old courthouse for hours the next day. The sun was hidden behind thick clouds, casting the world in a muted grey. The photograph had rattled her, just as it had been meant to. But the more she stared at the courthouse, the more questions swarmed her mind. Elijah Booker. That name hung in the air like smoke. Her pulse quickened as she felt the weight of history pushing down on her, the spectre of the past that this town had so carefully buried under layers of complacency. Elijah Booker had come before the council nearly a century ago. She knew that much. What she didn't know was how someone who was supposed to be dead had walked through those same doors last week. The only logical explanation was that it couldn't be the same man. It had to be someone with a grudge, someone playing games with the town's collective memory. But deep down, Mia knew that wasn't true. She could feel it in her gut. There was something far more twisted at play here. The more she pieced together from the history books and the few surviving records, the clearer it became. Graybridge, for all its clean streets and manicured lawns, had always been a town built on secrets. And those secrets weren't just about the land or the old council meetings. They ran deeper into the blood that flowed through this town's veins, blood that had been spilled on this very ground, blood that had been used to forge the rules and the systems that kept everything in place, blood that had never been allowed to rise again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was an email from her editor, Carl. "Mia, I just got off the phone with the mayor's office. They're asking questions about the footage. They want to know what you're planning. We can't afford to stir things up. You're pushing too hard. Drop it." Mia clenched her fist around the phone. She didn't want to drop it. Not now. Not when she was so close. She couldn't feel the weight of what had been hidden for so long and walk away. Not when people like the mayor, people like those councilmen, were still living in their ivory towers, never acknowledging the blood on their hands. She turned back toward the courthouse, the old building looming like a monument to injustice. There had to be a reason Elijah Booker had returned. Maybe it was revenge. Maybe it was a warning. Maybe it was something even darker. But one thing was certain. This town wasn't going to let the truth come out without a fight. Later that night, Mia went to the local library, its long aisles and dusty shelves a sanctuary of information, a place where history could still be uncovered. She passed through rows of old newspapers, archives and ledgers, but nothing could prepare her for what she found in the corner of the basement, locked behind an iron gate. The librarian, a sweet woman named Mrs. Jenkins, had told Mia to stay out of the back room. It was too old, too delicate, she said. But Mia was too far gone. She had to see it. She had to know. Inside the back room, the air was thick with the smell of mildew, the shelves sagging with age. The pages of the old documents crinkled under her touch, as though they were ready to turn to dust. But there, buried under a pile of forgotten papers, she found something that made her heart stop. It was a journal, bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed and brittle. She opened it carefully, her breath catching in her throat as she read the first few lines, written in a hurried, frantic hand. "The town will never forget. We will never forgive. The blood of our fathers stains the streets, and the streets will never forget. Elijah Booker is dead, but he is not gone. He will return. He always returns." The writing was followed by a strange symbol, something that looked like a cross between a tree and a snake, winding its way around a forgotten name. Booker. Mia couldn't breathe. She closed the journal, her hands trembling. This wasn't just history. This wasn't just some old family secret. This was a warning. Elijah Booker hadn't just disappeared. He'd been erased, not just from the records, but from the very fabric of the town itself. And now someone was bringing him back. The next morning, Mia went to the mayor's office, her mind made up. She wasn't going to back down. She needed answers, and she needed them now. The door to the mayor's office swung open, and she stepped inside, her heart hammering in her chest. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "I need to know what happened to Elijah Booker. I need to know why this town has been hiding the truth for so long." Callahan looked up from his desk, his eyes cold. "Mia, you don't know what you're asking for." "I do," she said, walking closer to his desk. "I know exactly what I'm asking for. You've buried this town's history under layers of lies and deceit, but now it's coming back, and you can't keep it hidden any longer." Callahan's jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. Leave it alone, Mia. You have no idea the kind of power that's been used to keep this town safe. We can't let the past come crawling back." The air in the room felt thicker now, like something dark was pressing against the walls. Mia didn't back down. Why was Elijah Booker erased? What did he do that was so dangerous? Callahan stood up, towering over her. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. He was dangerous because he knew the truth. He knew that Graybridge wasn't built on hard work and good people. It was built on blood. And the day the Bookers rise again, this town will burn. Mia felt her stomach churn. She had known there was something sinister at the heart of Graybridge, but she had never imagined it was this deep. This town, with its pristine streets and perfectly manicured lawns, was rotten to its core, and now the past was coming back to reclaim what had been stolen. Callahan turned away, his back to her now, his voice almost a hiss. You should leave it alone, Mia, before it's too late. But Mia knew it was already too late. The truth was coming, and there was no way to stop it. The Bookers were rising, and Graybridge was about to be torn apart. Mia's heart was pounding as she stepped out of Mayor Callahan's office. His words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. She had known this town was hiding something, but she had never expected it to be something so dark, so twisted. She stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to collect her thoughts. Her phone buzzed again. It was a message from Carl, her editor. I just got a call from the mayor's office. They want to meet with you. Says it's about the Elijah Booker story. They're offering to clear things up. Don't push this too far. Mia stared at the message, her fingers tightening around the phone. She wasn't stupid. She knew exactly what this was. An attempt to silence her, to shut down her investigation before it could go any further. But she couldn't stop now. She was too close. The past was unraveling, and she had to see it through. She replied quickly, typing out the words that made her heart race. I'll meet them, but only if I can bring a witness. A few moments passed before Carl responded. Fine, but don't get in over your head. This is bigger than you think. Mia didn't have time to ponder Carl's warning. She had a feeling he wasn't just talking about the mayor anymore. He was talking about something much darker. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized she was just scratching the surface. Elijah Booker's story was a wound that had been buried for decades, and it was only now, with each layer she peeled away, that she could see how deep the infection ran. The meeting was set for later that afternoon. As she made her way to the mayor's office again, her mind raced. She had to get answers, but she had to be careful. She couldn't trust Callahan, and she couldn't trust the town's history. Everything about Graybridge was stained, not just by the crimes of the past, but by the people who had buried them. When Mia arrived at the mayor's office, she was greeted by a security guard who led her through the hallways of the building. The place felt cold, sterile, as though no one had ever really lived there, only worked. She passed the portraits of long-dead council members, their eyes staring down at her as if they knew what she was about to uncover. She entered the office, where Callahan was waiting. His demeanor had changed since their last conversation. There was no longer the calm, confident arrogance in his posture. Now there was a tension, an almost imperceptible anxiety that clung to him. He stood behind his desk, hands folded in front of him, his jaw clenched tight. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice colder than it had been before. "I appreciate you coming. Please sit down." Mia remained standing. She wasn't about to play by his rules. "I don't need to sit," she replied, her voice steady, but her mind was racing. She had come here for one reason, and one reason only: to find out what the mayor was hiding. Callahan's eyes flicked to the chair, then back to her. He sighed, clearly frustrated. "You don't understand the danger you're playing with. The history of this town, it's not something you can just tear apart. You don't know what you're asking for." "I'm asking for the truth," Mia said, her voice sharp. "I'm asking for the truth about Elijah Booker and the land that was stolen from him. I'm asking for the truth about everything this town has buried for generations." Callahan's face hardened. He stepped around the desk, his hands coming together in front of him as though he were preparing for a fight. "You think you can just expose this, just write it all down, and the world will understand? You're wrong. This town was built on something stronger than you can imagine. The Bookers, they knew too much. That's why they were erased." Mia took a step forward, her eyes never leaving his. Erased? You mean murdered? Callahan flinched, but quickly recovered. Murdered, he repeated, as if testing the word on his tongue. And worse, it wasn't just murder. It was a message that no one, not even people like Booker, could challenge the system. The system that built this town, that made men like me what we are today. Mia felt a chill run through her. So you're telling me that this town, all of it, is built on blood? Callahan looked down at the floor, a grim smile playing at the corners of his lips. That's exactly what I'm telling you. This town was never meant to be a place for people like Elijah Booker. He wasn't supposed to survive. He wasn't supposed to rise up and challenge what we had worked so hard to build. And when he did, we took care of it. We buried him. And now, you're here, digging up the past, trying to unearth things that are better left forgotten. Mia felt her pulse quicken, the gravity of what Callahan was saying sinking in. This wasn't just about one man, one family. This was about the entire town. Everything that had been built in Graybridge, the businesses, the homes, the streets, had been paid for by the blood of people like Elijah Booker and his ancestors. And Callahan was willing to do whatever it took to keep that secret buried. You don't get to decide what the truth is, Mia said, her voice steady but filled with an edge of fury. You don't get to keep hiding what you've done. You can't erase history just because you're afraid of it. Callahan's eyes darkened. You have no idea what you're dealing with. The past is alive here, Mia, and when you wake it up, there's no going back. He paused, his gaze flickering toward the window, his expression distant. You think this town is just a place, a little dot on the map, a quiet town with its problems and its people. But Graybridge is more than that. It's a monument to something much older, and if you keep digging, you won't just uncover history. You'll awaken something that's been sleeping for a very long time. Mia took a deep breath, her mind racing. She didn't care about the threat. She didn't care about the danger. All she cared about now was the truth about Elijah Booker, the truth about the blood that had been spilled to build Graybridge. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. Is that supposed to scare me? She asked, her voice cold. Because it's not going to work. Callahan's gaze sharpened. You don't understand. This town is cursed, and if you keep pushing, it will drag you down with it. Mia stood her ground. I'm not afraid of your curse. I'm not afraid of you. For a moment, there was silence. Then Callahan spoke again, his voice low and dangerous. You will be. You will be. The room seemed to grow colder, the weight of history pressing in on Mia. She knew she had to get out of there. She had to keep going no matter what. But as she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A small, faded photograph on the wall. It was a picture of the original council from the early 1900s. Elijah Booker's face was there, unmistakable, but there was something else. The mayor's office had kept the photo hidden, framed in a corner like a secret. But now, Mia saw it clearly. Callahan wasn't just the mayor of Graybridge. He was part of the bloodline that had destroyed the Bookers. He was the product of a system built on exploitation, on power, on the kind of darkness that had run through this town since its founding. And now, Mia knew she was on the edge of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. Graybridge wasn't just a town, it was a war zone, a battlefield where the past was alive and its enemies were not yet finished. Mia couldn't sleep that night. The mayor's words echoed in her mind, each syllable heavier than the last. She had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. The deeper she dug, the more the town seemed to pull away from her, as though it were trying to swallow her whole. Graybridge wasn't just a town, it was a living thing, and the past was its heart, beating in the shadows. But Mia couldn't let it go. She couldn't ignore the truth. Elijah Booker's name had been erased, buried beneath decades of silence. But the more she uncovered, the clearer it became that his story wasn't just one man's struggle. It was the struggle of an entire people. And if she didn't expose it, if she didn't uncover what had been hidden for so long, the town would keep feeding off that darkness, suffocating everything around it. She woke up early the next morning, determined to find more answers. There had to be more evidence, more witnesses. The pieces were starting to fit together, but she wasn't done. Not yet. She grabbed her notebook and scanned through the pages she'd written over the last few days, trying to make sense of the fragments of the past. She'd spoken to a few of the older residents, those who had been around long enough to remember Graybridge before the shiny veneer of progress had been slapped on. Some of them had stories, things they'd never said aloud before, small-town gossip, whispers of injustice, things that had been buried deep, as if speaking them would bring back the ghosts of the past. Her phone buzzed on the table and she glanced at the screen. Carl's name flashed up. "Mia, meet me at the diner. We need to talk." She sighed and rubbed her eyes. She hadn't told Carl everything. She hadn't told him about the journal, or the strange symbol she'd found, or the way the town seemed to close in on her every time she dug deeper. He would never understand. Not unless she could show him what she had seen. The darkness that was still alive here, pulsing beneath the surface. The diner was empty when Mia arrived, save for the older man behind the counter, who nodded at her as she walked in. Carl was sitting in the far corner, looking more tired than usual. He had the same scruffy look he always wore, but today there was something different in his eyes, something sharp, something worried. "What's going on, Carl?" Mia asked, slipping into the seat across from him. Carl didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked over his shoulder, as if making sure no one was listening. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost conspiratorial. "You were right about the mayor," he said. "I've been hearing things. People are starting to talk, and they're scared." "Scared of what?" Mia pressed, her pulse quickening. "Of what you're digging up," Carl said, his eyes narrowing. "Some people think you're getting too close. They think you're about to bring up something that should have stayed buried. Something that, well, it's not just about the Bookers. It's about a lot more." Mia frowned. "What do you mean?" Carl hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. Graybridge wasn't just built on land deals and laws. It was built on something darker, something that goes back further than even the town's founding. There's a group, a network, call them whatever you want, that has been running this town for generations. They've kept everything in their hands. The real power, it's never been with the people. It's always been with them. And the Bookers were a threat to that. Elijah Booker, he knew too much. Mia felt her stomach tighten. What did he know? Carl shook his head. "I don't know the details, but whatever it was, it scared people in power. It scared them enough that they had to erase him, and everyone like him. They couldn't have a leader like that stirring things up. They couldn't afford to let it spread." Mia felt a chill run down her spine. So the Bookers weren't just a family that got in the way. They were a symbol, a threat to something bigger. "Exactly," Carl said, his face grim. "And now you're stirring it all up again. People are starting to take notice, Mia. You need to be careful. The deeper you go, the more dangerous this becomes. You're not just digging into the past. You're digging into a system that's been in place for decades, and the people in charge are willing to do anything to keep it that way." Mia swallowed hard. What are they going to do? Carl didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at his coffee, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the cup. Finally, he spoke again, his voice heavy with something that sounded like regret. "They'll do whatever it takes to stop you. And I don't think you're ready for what's coming. This isn't just about some forgotten family or a history lesson. This is about power. This is about money, control, and everything that Graybridge was built on." Mia's mind was racing. She could feel the walls closing in. It was one thing to expose the lies, to uncover the truth. But it was another thing entirely to realize that the truth had teeth, and that it could bite. She knew Carl was right. She had no idea what she was dealing with. But now, she had no choice. She had to keep going. She had to find Elijah Booker. She had to understand why he was erased and what it meant for the town, for her, and for everyone who had been living under its shadow. As Mia stood to leave, Carl grabbed her wrist, his grip strong but urgent. "Don't do this alone," he said, his voice strained. "Get out while you still can. They won't just threaten you, they'll do worse. Mia pulled her wrist free, her eyes locking onto his. I'm not running, Carl. I'm not going to stop. I have to know. She walked out of the diner without looking back, but the weight of his warning stayed with her. She had crossed a line now, and there was no turning back. She needed answers, but the more she uncovered, the more the town seemed to close in around her, as though it were pulling her towards something inevitable. That night, Mia sat at her desk, staring at the pages she had filled with notes, photographs, and excerpts from the journal she'd found in the library basement. Every piece of information, every connection, every clue she'd uncovered had led her to one undeniable truth. Graybridge was built on the bones of its past. And as she pieced the fragments together, she could see the dark truth emerging, the truth that no one wanted to face. And that truth was about to change everything. The morning after Carl's warning, Mia found herself standing outside the gates of Graybridge's forgotten cemetery. The iron fence, twisted and bent by time, had been rusting for decades, and the gates themselves barely clung to their hinges, a stark contrast to the pristine, manicured streets of the town. The cemetery was a place few people dared to visit, save for the occasional mourner or maintenance worker. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, and Mia felt an overwhelming sense of weight on her chest as she stepped inside. The reason she was here was simple. She needed answers. The journal she'd found, the symbol of the Booker family, and the chilling words that had been left in the archives, everything pointed to something buried in this old plot of land. A family, erased by time, their lives and legacy wiped out by the very system that had been built on their suffering. She walked slowly between the crumbling headstones, the names and dates nearly unreadable. She could feel the weight of the history pressing down on her, the quiet whispers of those long gone, their stories lost to the shadows. Elijah Booker's name had been erased, but Mia was determined to bring it back to life. As she walked deeper into the cemetery, a soft sound caught her attention. A rustling, like footsteps behind her. She spun around, her heart racing, but there was no one there. The silence was almost oppressive, the only sound the distant hum of cars passing by on the other side of the town. For a moment, Mia considered leaving, but the pull of the past, the sense that something was watching, urged her forward. At the far end of the cemetery, near an overgrown section that had long been forgotten, Mia found what she was looking for. A large, weathered stone marked the grave of Elijah Booker. The engraving was worn and nearly illegible, but she could make out the words. A man who stood for what was right in a world that wanted him silent. Mia knelt down beside the grave, her fingers brushing against the stone, the coolness of it, sending a shiver through her. She couldn't help but wonder what Booker had known, what he had seen, and what had been hidden from the public eye. He had been a threat to the system, and the system had buried him, erased him, and buried the truth along with him. She pulled out her notebook and scribbled down everything she could remember from the journal she had found. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how deeply entrenched the Booker family's story was in the town's history. The more she dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about a single family. It was about the foundation of Graybridge itself. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. She pulled it out, seeing a message from Carl. Mia, I'm worried. I've been hearing things. People are talking about you. You need to be careful. They'll stop at nothing to keep this quiet. She stared at the message for a moment, then typed back quickly. I'm fine, Carl. Just trying to connect the dots. I'll be careful. But as she stood up to leave, the hairs on the back of her neck prickled. The air had changed, thickened, and Mia couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced around, but the cemetery was empty. She was alone, still. Something about the place felt off. There was something in the air, something ancient, like the land itself was trying to hold on to its secrets. She turned to leave, but just as she reached the gate, she heard it again. A soft rustling, like someone, or something, was following her. She spun around, her heart pounding, but again, there was no one there. She walked faster now, the unease gnawing at her, the feeling that someone, or something, was lurking just out of sight. It wasn't until she reached her car and slammed the door shut behind her that she allowed herself to breathe again. She looked back at the cemetery one last time. The place seemed even darker now, as if it were watching her leave. As she drove back into the heart of Graybridge, Mia's mind raced. She needed to find more answers, more people who could help piece this together. She couldn't do it alone anymore. She needed someone to help her dig through the lies, the history, the records that had been hidden for so long. But who could she trust? As she pulled into her driveway, she spotted a figure standing near her front door. A tall man, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat, his posture rigid and unnerving. Mia's pulse quickened as she slammed the car door shut and made her way toward him. It was then that she saw the badge pinned to his chest. "I'm Detective Raymond Calloway," the man said, his voice deep, controlled. "We need to talk." Mia stopped in her tracks. "About what?" "The investigation you're conducting," Calloway said, his gaze unwavering. "You've been asking a lot of questions, Mia. Questions that people don't want answered. And now, people are starting to take notice." Mia's heart dropped into her stomach. She hadn't expected this. Not like this. The way Calloway was standing, so firm, so unyielding, it felt like a warning. "Are you threatening me?" she asked, her voice steady, but the adrenaline pumping through her veins. "Consider it a request," Calloway said, his eyes narrowing. "This town has a long history of protecting its own. You don't understand what you're dealing with. The people who run this place, people like the mayor, like the council, they don't want the truth to come out. And if you keep pushing, there will be consequences." Mia stood her ground. "I'm not backing down." Calloway's lips curled into a smile, but it was empty, like a predator sizing up its prey. "You might not have a choice." He turned and began walking toward his car, his boots echoing in the quiet street. Mia watched him go, her mind racing. She knew she was in deep now, too deep to turn back. She had already uncovered so much, and yet it felt like there was so much more to find. The deeper she went, the more the town seemed to close in around her. Its dark, suffocating secrets pressing down on her at every turn. She couldn't stop now. Not when she was so close to the truth. But Mia also knew something else. The truth was dangerous, and once it was exposed, there would be no going back. The late afternoon sky was shrouded in thick clouds, casting a muted grey light over Graybridge. The town felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. For what? Mia couldn't say. She had spent the last few days trying to gather what she could, speaking to anyone who might know something, but all the information seemed to blur together, more cryptic than useful, more dangerous than informative. But there was one person left she needed to see. One last thread to pull, and it would either break everything wide open or leave her stranded, lost in a sea of unanswered questions. The Booker family. More specifically, the last surviving member, Elijah's grandson, Jonathan Booker. Mia had managed to track Jonathan down after weeks of trying. He'd gone underground years ago, seemingly disappearing off the grid. Rumors had followed him like a shadow. Talk of him being unstable, dangerous, or even crazy. But Mia didn't believe that. She knew there had to be something he knew. Something that could shed light on the secrets of Graybridge and the history that had been hidden away. She had been hesitant to visit him, unsure of how he might react to a stranger digging into the past. But the situation had grown desperate. Mia wasn't going to back down now. Not when the stakes were higher than they'd ever been. Jonathan lived on the outskirts of town, in a house that had been abandoned for years, its windows cracked, its paint peeling. It stood like a fortress, surrounded by thick trees that blocked any view from the road. When Mia drove up the long, narrow driveway, her heart raced. The air seemed heavy, thick with something dark that she couldn't put her finger on. She had seen houses like this before, places that seemed to absorb the misery of everything that had happened there, as if the past lingered in the walls, in the ground, in the very air. Mia parked her car and stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath her feet as she approached the front door. The house was silent, as if holding its breath, and she couldn't help but wonder if anyone had been inside recently. The door creaked when she knocked, but there was no immediate answer. She knocked again, louder this time, her heart pounding with anticipation. After what felt like an eternity, the door slowly creaked open, revealing a man who looked much older than he should have. Jonathan Booker's face was hard, weathered. His eyes seemed to hold years of pain, of battles fought and lost. His hair was long and wild, his clothes ragged, but his presence was undeniable. He looked at Mia for a long moment before stepping aside, as if he'd been expecting her. "You're the one asking about Elijah, aren't you?" His voice was low, rough, like the sound of gravel being crushed underfoot. Mia nodded, her breath catching in her throat. "I need to know everything. What happened to your grandfather? What did he know? Why did they erase him? Why did they erase your family?" Jonathan stared at her for a long time, as if weighing whether or not he could trust her. Finally, he stepped aside fully and motioned for her to enter. Inside, the house was dim, the only light coming from a few small windows covered in dust. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and something else Mia couldn't identify. Something that clung to the room like the ghosts of those who had lived here. As she stepped inside, Jonathan moved to a table in the corner and sat down, his eyes never leaving her. "You think you can understand what happened to us? What happened to my grandfather?" Mia sat across from him, her hands trembling. "I think I can. I think I've seen enough to understand. But I need your help. You're the last one who can tell me the truth." Jonathan's eyes flickered with something that could have been regret, but it passed quickly. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "Truth?" he muttered. "You want the truth? Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." He paused, gathering his thoughts, and then he spoke, his words slow and deliberate. "They came for us when my grandfather started asking questions. Questions about land, about property, about ownership. But it wasn't just that. It was power. It was control. The people who ran this town, they didn't want us to have anything. They couldn't let us rise up, couldn't let us challenge the system. My grandfather saw it for what it was. He knew that the land they had stolen from us wasn't just about money. It was about keeping people like us down, keeping us in our place." Mia listened intently, her heart pounding. She knew the history of the town, the forced land sales, the violence that had followed. But hearing it from Jonathan, hearing the pain in his voice as he spoke of it, brought the weight of it all crashing down. "Why didn't anyone do something?" Mia asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jonathan chuckled bitterly. "Because no one could. Not back then. They had the law, they had the money, and they had the muscle. They had everything. And anyone who tried to fight back was either silenced or erased, just like my grandfather." Mia felt a knot in her stomach tighten. She could see it now, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. The murder of Elijah Booker wasn't just a crime. It was a message, a warning to anyone who would dare challenge the system. The same system that had allowed the white elite to dominate Graybridge for generations. "But they didn't kill your grandfather," Mia said. "They erased him. They made him disappear." Jonathan's eyes darkened. "They didn't have to kill him. Not in the way you're thinking. They destroyed him in every way that mattered. They took everything from him, his land, his reputation, his life. They made sure no one would ever remember him, ever speak his name again." Mia felt the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. This wasn't just about the past. It was about what was still happening today. Graybridge's history had been built on the backs of people like Elijah Booker, and it was still being upheld by the same people who had stolen everything from them. The system hadn't just been a force of the past. It was a living, breathing entity, and it was alive and well. "So what now?" Mia asked, her voice raw. "What can we do? How do we stop this?" Jonathan looked at her, his face unreadable. "You can't stop it, not by yourself. No one can." Mia shook her head. "There has to be a way. There has to be something we can do." Jonathan stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You don't get it. The people in charge, they're not just a group of powerful men. They're a machine. They've been running this town for centuries, and they'll do whatever it takes to keep their power. You can't take them down, Mia. You can't fight this alone." Mia stood up, her body trembling with frustration. "I won't back down," she said, her voice steady, determined. I can't. The truth needs to come out. And if I have to tear this town apart to make that happen, I will. Jonathan stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. You're brave. I'll give you that. But don't think you're the first person to try. Many have tried before you, and most of them didn't live to tell the tale. He walked toward the door, opening it slowly. You want the truth? Fine. But be prepared. Once you start digging, you won't be able to stop. Mia looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of what she had just learned. I don't care what it takes, she said firmly. I'm going to bring the truth to light. I'm going to make sure they never bury it again. Jonathan didn't say anything. He simply stepped aside, allowing her to leave. As Mia walked back to her car, the world around her seemed to shift. The weight of the past was heavier than ever. But it wasn't just history anymore. It was the present. And if she was going to expose the truth, she would have to face the full force of the system that had tried so hard to bury it. The wind howled through the narrow streets of Graybridge, a restless whisper carrying the ghosts of the past. The town had always been good at pretending that it was built on good values, on a sense of community, on shared history. But Mia had dug deep, and now the truth was rising from the depths, ready to tear through the carefully constructed facade. She couldn't stop now. The stakes were too high. The people who had built this town on blood, sweat, and stolen dreams could no longer hide. The Bookers had been erased from history, but Mia had made them visible again. Elijah Booker's name was no longer buried, no longer forgotten, and it was time for the town to face the consequences. Mia sat at her kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents in front of her. Property deeds, records from the council meetings, newspaper clippings. The evidence was all there. Every single detail she had uncovered pointed back to the same truth. Graybridge had been founded on violence, on lies, on the systematic erasure of black lives. She had thought about quitting, about walking away, but she couldn't. Not after everything she had learned. Not after all the years the Bookers had been silenced. There was a knock at the door. Mia's heart skipped a beat. She didn't need to open it to know who it was. She stood up slowly and walked to the door, her hand resting on the doorknob for a moment. She was tired of running, tired of fighting, but she couldn't give up now. She opened the door. Detective Raymond Calloway stood there, his hands clasped behind his back, his face unreadable. His presence was imposing, the weight of the badge he wore heavy in the air. I'm not here to arrest you, Mia, he said quietly. I'm here because I need you to listen. This is bigger than you think, bigger than all of us. Mia's mind raced, but she didn't step back. I've heard enough of your warnings, Calloway. If you're here to threaten me... I'm not here to threaten you, he interrupted. I'm here to tell you the truth, the real truth. Mia's heart sank. She'd heard whispers, but she hadn't realized how far this corruption ran. She wasn't prepared for what Calloway was about to say, but she had no choice but to hear it. Graybridge's history isn't just about the Bookers, Calloway continued, his voice steady but tinged with regret. It's about the power structures that have always been in place. You've been digging into something much deeper than you understand. The council, the mayor, they've always controlled this town. They've kept it hidden, buried. But it's not just about land. It's about keeping people like you and me down. People of color. They built this town on the backs of black bodies, and they've never had to answer for it. No one has ever challenged them. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She had known, in her gut, that there was more to this story. But hearing it from Calloway, someone she had once trusted to uphold the law, felt like a betrayal. I've been part of it, Mia, Calloway confessed, his eyes darkening. I've been part of keeping the truth buried. The system's been in place for too long, and I didn't know how to break free from it. But I see now that what you're doing, it's something that needs to be done. The people here, people like the mayor, they'll do anything to protect their legacy. They don't care who they hurt. They'll burn this town to the ground before they let anyone disrupt the order they've built. Mia stared at him, her emotions swirling. She had always believed that the law would be a force for good, that the truth would set things right. But now, she realized, the law had been a tool for oppression, for maintaining the status quo. Calloway had been trapped, just like everyone else, and now Mia was the only one who could bring this all crashing down. "Why are you telling me this?" Mia asked, her voice tight. "Because it's too late for me to turn back," Calloway said, his voice breaking slightly. "I've seen too much. I've been complicit for far too long. But you can do something about it. You can expose the truth. You're the one who's been brave enough to face what they've been hiding. You're the one who can bring the light into the darkness." Mia's mind was spinning. She had known she was up against something far bigger than she had ever anticipated. But this was different. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about the people who had been silenced, about the history that had been stolen from them. It was about Graybridge and everything that had been done in its name. "I don't care if I'm the only one," Mia said, her voice steely with determination. "I'm going to expose this town for what it really is, and when I'm done, the world will see it." Calloway stepped back, his eyes searching hers. "Just be careful. The people who run this town, they won't go down without a fight." "I know," Mia said, her voice resolute, "and I'm ready for it." She slammed the door behind her, the sound of it echoing in the silence. She had one final move to make. It was time to confront the mayor, to lay everything out on the table and demand answers. She wasn't going to let this be swept under the rug. Not again. Mia gathered her documents and her notes, her hands shaking but her resolve growing stronger. She drove to City Hall, the familiar streets of Graybridge now seeming foreign, as if she were driving through a place she no longer recognized. The town she had grown up in, the town she had trusted, was a lie, and now she was going to tear that lie apart. When she arrived at City Hall, the building felt different. It was no longer a place of power and respect. It was a symbol of the corruption that had been hidden behind its walls. Mia took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked inside. The mayor's office was just as cold and sterile as it had been when she'd first encountered him. The walls were lined with portraits of dead men, their eyes staring down at her, as if they knew what she was about to do, as if they knew the truth would come to light, no matter how hard they tried to bury it. She walked up to the desk where Mayor Robert Callahan III sat, his hands folded in front of him, his expression smug and unreadable. "I know what you've been doing, Mayor Callahan," Mia said, her voice sharp. "I know about the Bookers. I know about the land. I know about the lies." The mayor didn't flinch. He simply smiled, his eyes cold. "You think you can change anything, Mia? You think you can take down what's been built over 100 years? You have no idea what you're up against." "I know exactly what I'm up against," Mia said, her voice unwavering. "I'm up against a system that's been built on violence and lies, and I'm going to tear it down." The mayor stood up, his expression darkening. "You have no idea what you're dealing with. You're playing with fire, Mia. You'll burn everything down, and when the ashes settle, you won't be able to put it back together." "I'm not afraid of your threats," Mia said, her eyes burning with defiance. "The truth is coming, whether you like it or not." For a moment, the room was silent. The weight of their words hung in the air like a storm on the horizon. But Mia knew something that the mayor didn't. The truth was unstoppable. No matter how much power, no matter how much corruption, the truth would always rise to the surface. Mia turned and walked out of the office, her heart pounding. She had done it. She had exposed the lies. Graybridge's hidden history was no longer a secret. And now, the world would see it for what it truly was. The town would never be the same. We'd love to hear what you think about this story. What are your thoughts on the events that unfolded? Have you ever experienced or witnessed racism in your own life? Your opinions are incredibly important to us, and we deeply value each and every one of you for being part of this journey. If you enjoyed the story, please consider subscribing and leaving a like to support our work. We are grateful for your engagement and feedback. Have a great day and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. If you've listened to the end, please leave a comment with the phrase, "The truth always rises," so we know you're with us till the very finish. Your words matter to us.